Welcome to Old Path Ministries and our study through the Gospel of John. We will complete chapter 8, and if you want to go ahead and turn there, we're going to start at verse 31. I was thinking about this before recording, and when you think about the Gospel of John, there are some chapters that all you need to do is say the number of the chapter, and people who have spent a lot of time around the Word will remember what's in that chapter because it has such important, impactful bits of information. So, chapter 1, we always get that first few verses. In the beginning was the Word. And so, such an important thing that is said there. We know that by the time that we look through it, that He became flesh and dwelt among us in chapter 1, verse 14 or verse 17, that grace and truth came through Jesus Christ, even though the law came through Moses. So, chapter 1 is one of those chapters. Chapter 3 certainly is one of those chapters as well, because it's the whole dialogue with Nicodemus, and we hear the term being born again by Jesus, and it's such an important part. Everybody knows John 3:16. Chapter 4, the woman at the well, such a memorable passage, and that whole section, they're very, very easy to remember. Of course, chapter 6, and Jesus saying that He's the bread of life. So you could go through it. Chapter 15, vine and the branches, He's the way, the truth, and the life. In chapter 14, chapter 17, He prays for the disciples and for those who would come to know Him. Chapter 8, I think, sometimes gets overlooked. And some of the things that Jesus says here are just off the charts important. And some of them are memorable. We hear them quoted. Chapter 8 ends with such an important thing. He says something that is as monumental as anything that He could have said in those times. Now, again, we're kind of immune to it, whether we realize it or not. The things that He says, we have the benefit of hindsight of 2,000 years. But if you could try to wrap your mind around this, of a Jewish mentality, if we understand the Old Testament and we understand what was going on then and what their understanding was when Jesus said the things that He did, no wonder it caused such difficulty for so many people. Because if they're just people who look only at the law and don't look at the things that were prophesied about someone who would come, at least their eyes may have been opened somewhat to the idea that somebody could show up down the road and He would make a number of claims. Of course, they would want to vet that person and make sure that he fit all of the necessary criteria. A few times that they've done this, they certainly knew about Messiah and who would be coming. They knew things about that because they're always questioning Him about, well, who are your parents? And you're from up in Galilee, you're a Nazarene. So all of that stuff, they didn't know enough about Him to know that He was from Bethlehem. We have in the rest of this chapter kind of the same thing. They say things about Him not having the slightest clue just who He is. But where we start today, in these couple of verses that we just begin with, they're so important for us to understand. And again, thinking of them in a Jewish mentality and even a first century mentality for the church to try to wrap their minds around this truth. That just even the idea of truth, of what is accurate and what is not accurate. Spiritually speaking, we know, even for them, that if there is anything to be known that is true, it would have to have God as its author. They would at least understand that. We, again, take for granted, because it's all that we've ever known, but Jesus is the representation of what is true. So if you want to know what is accurate and what is true, you just simply look to the person of Jesus, either who He is and what He represents, or what He taught and what that implied. No matter what it is, as you look at Him, He is the very embodiment of truth. So for us to read what we're about to read, it's not a stretch for us for a few reasons. Again, we have 2,000 years of hindsight. To the believer, the person who has been forgiven of their sin, who have understood what has been offered to them by the person of Jesus and accepted that, and that they have been cleansed from their sin and their unrighteousness, and they have been regenerated by the Spirit of the living God, or born again. It's not hard for us to understand these things, but you can certainly see the difficulty that some here had. Now, they had the added level of problem that they were just straight up adversarial to him. They couldn't stand what he was saying and what he was doing. It was such a departure, and in the back of their minds, they had to know what he represented. Really, it represented to them kind of an existential threat to who they were and what they were about, because people were gravitating to him, and they were beginning to become more increasingly, adversarial even to the Jews. How many times when I say the Jews, I mean the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the people he's contending with here. Because there were times that the Pharisees and the religious leadership wanted to do away with him. We're going to see one of those examples here. But there were other times when they wanted him arrested, and yet they would not do so out of fear. The people they were afraid that the people would rise up against them if they tried to take him by force. So these are the dynamics that are going on behind the scenes. So what we've had so far, he has just said the second of his I am statements, that he is the light of the world, and a person that walks in with him and who is in him will not walk in darkness. It's an absolute statement. He's going to say a number of other absolute statements, even in our text here today. But what he says in the opening couple of verses, again, I think I said it last week, it's why I didn't want to just jump right into this particular section, because as you'll see, it's hard to break it up because it's a continuing dialogue. Even though it's still part of chapter 8, that same dialogue, he's still in the exact same place. There's a little bit of a pivot here, and some things that he says, it elaborates on him as being that light of the world, the second of his I ams. But it also is going to have brand new elements to it that he's about to add, and it's just going to send them over the edge. Again, especially when you look at the last couple of verses. Oh my goodness. It is quite intriguing, their reaction. So with all that said, we're going to pick up at verse 31. Let's have a word of prayer. Father, we thank you as we come to your word. We know that it is your Spirit who leads us in all truth. And we can come to you and we can seek to understand your word. And we have the promise, we have the assurance that the Spirit will lead us in our understanding and guide us as we study these things. And again, we thank you that we are able to come to your word, and it's not something that is only available to those people who know. It is available to anyone who seeks you. And so we thank you and pray that you would give us understanding. We thank you for your word and pray that it would mold us and shape us into your image. And we ask it in Jesus' name. All right, so verse 31. We see, actually looking at verse 30 from last week, he spoke these words, many believed in him. And so here is where this becomes, when we get to the next couple of verses, you'll see that there's a little bit of a controversy about who are the people contending with him versus the ones who believed. So it says that they believed in him, and then verse 30, and so Jesus said to those Jews who did believe him. Now, it doesn't say believe in him, but just believed him. So there's a big debate whether or not there were people who had come to believe in him and stayed with him, or they believed the things that he was saying, but what he's about to say is going to put them back into the place of being adversary. You'll see as it develops. So then verse 31, Jesus said to those who believed him, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples indeed. So there is this idea of abiding. And again, same thing that we find in chapter 15 of John's gospel, that if you abide in me and I in you, all of those abiding verses that we see of the vine and the branches, same words that are being spoken of here. So abiding means it's not a momentary kind of a thing. It is, they've come to him never to leave again. That abiding, that idea of staying with him and in him, it is a relationship matter. And again, it's become cliche, sadly enough, where people say, we don't have a religion, we have a relationship. As a Christian slogan or as a bumper sticker, it is absolutely accurate. But because it's become a slogan and a bumper sticker, it becomes cliche and people just kind of roll their eyes at it. But let's make sure that we genuinely understand that. The idea that in the person of Jesus, for the very first time, people could be personally in a face-to-face kind of a knowledge and an understanding and a friendship with God in person. So yeah, there is absolute truth to that. It is not religion, it is relationship. So it is not us trying to be good enough for God. The believer has come to him recognizing that they are never going to be that good and that they need his mercy and his grace and his forgiveness. And by doing so, what ensues from it is that he knows his sheep and they know him. Chapter 10, the Good Shepherd chapter. So there is a face-to-face, a one-on-one, where there's a friendship, there is a peace between us and God because of the person of Jesus. Well, this is what he's talking about. So if you're going to do this, you must abide in my word, the things that I have instructed you, the understanding of who he has revealed himself to be. A person needs to agree to that, believe it, and stay in that place of abiding and believing. It's to never leave his side once we come to him. That's what's implied here. So he says, if you abide in my word, then you are my disciples indeed. You're not just quasi, you're not pseudo people, you're not ones that are just putting up a front. You're genuinely his disciples. And in exchange for that, here's what we'll get. You will know the truth, and the truth will make you free. It will make you understand. You will come to grips with these truths. Now, if I want to use myself as an example, I'm sure that most, if not all of you, could do the same thing. Before I got saved around the age of 20, I grew up in a house where I heard him mentioned all the time. And again, it's a society. There was never a time in the 60s and 70s growing up as a kid that there wasn't at least the knowledge of who God was. I knew that there was this person named Jesus. I had heard about the Holy Spirit. I grew up in what is just kind of a religious tradition, but we weren't real faithful to it. But there wasn't anybody that needed to come to me and tell me about the person of Jesus that I didn't already know of in the sense of being historical. I understood that. But the idea that once I began to examine the things that he had said, seeing the things that were promised in the Word of God, and that place of coming to him and saying, yes, I believe, and that acknowledgement of my need to be forgiven of my sin because it was a problem and there was nothing that I could do about it. Once I accepted the forgiveness that he offered on his terms, everything changed. The Holy Spirit was given as promise. He resides in us. We're regenerated, and man, the lights come on. He is the light of the world. Yeah, so when he says things, I don't have to fumble around and think, is it true? Is it understandable? It's open to my understanding and to my eyes. Same thing right here. So that idea, if we're going to abide in him, believing in what he has said, we're going to understand the truth. And that truth is going to make us free. And that is free from the bondage of sin and death in the eternal sense. But there's a freedom that the believer has even in this world, no matter what they have to face. And again, here we are in the West, and the Western church doesn't face a lot of trouble and a lot of discrimination and persecution. But with everything happened since the beginning of this year, 2020, and how churches have been really kind of put upon more so than many places where people can congregate, you can basically see the day coming when if the right people or the wrong people, depending on how you look at it, if they ever see the seats of power, they don't have any kind of pushback against them in their authority, the church can become persecuted just like it is in most of the rest of the world. So let's be reminded of that. The genuine Church of Jesus Christ, it is not always an easy thing to be a member of it, depending on where you live in the world. We forget that oftentimes in the West. So Jesus says, you will know the truth, and that truth will make you free. So they answered him, and they said, now we are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been in bondage to anyone, so how can you say you will make us free? Now, here's where the question becomes, are these the people who believed in him? Or are these the people that he's been fighting with the whole time? So he says these things, people come to know who he is, he continues to say the things that he does. In my estimation, this is the same people who didn't believe in who he was, and you're going to see that because of their questioning. These are people who have always been adversarial, and they are here as well. So without telling us, it kind of, I believe, switches back from those who were believing him to those who didn't believe in him at all. You can tell by their arguments. And of course, the first one that they bring up is, what do you mean make us free? We've never been in bondage to anyone. Here is where spiritual, religious belief is so incredibly blinding. So for them to be able to say, we've never been in bondage to anyone. Remember Egypt, guys? Do you remember that? The whole thing with Pharaoh? I mean, there was an exodus because of it. Maybe you've heard of this guy Moses. So their blindness was profound. Now, here, fast forward from Moses' time, 1,500 years, and here you are to Jesus' time, they can't do anything without Rome. And so Rome owns them. Now, they're just enough of an arrogant type to not even look at that. Okay, so they're basically, I guess you could say in the power sense, we're the authority. Yeah, but you can't do anything without Rome. And before that, it was the Greeks. Before that, it was the Persians. Before that, it was the Babylonians. So, let's just be honest. These guys could never look back and say, we're autonomous. And it wasn't going to be long after Jesus died, some 30 some odd years, they were going to be wiped out entirely by the nation of Rome, and they're going to be dispersed. And that was going to last for 1900 years plus. But in this case, what you have are people who are so arrogant and so adversarial to Jesus, they don't even realize how ridiculous their own statements are, and so they continue on. Well, so how is it they say in verse 33, how is it that you're going to make us free? And then Jesus said to them, most assuredly I say to you, whoever commits sin is a slave to sin. Isn't this wonderful? So here's how Jesus is going to say, what kind of a freedom are you talking about? Again, they're thinking nationalistic, maybe, even in their blindness, as Rome is kind of just eating their lunch. And so with all that being said, Jesus wants to turn this to the matter of sin, really what he intended in the first place. He's going to turn it back to that. So he says, I'm saying to you, whoever commits sin, they're enslaved to it. They are going to be the servant of it. And he says, and a slave does not abide in the house forever, but a son abides forever. Therefore, if the Son sets you free, then you will be free indeed. So Jesus is saying to them, as the Son in the Father's house, I have the ability to set a person free from sin. They're thinking Rome. Jesus is speaking in spiritual terms. Again, there are those times that we may have conversations just with people exactly like this. And chances are most, if not all of them, are never going to come to our side of things, but we will say the things that we say so that all are able to hear. And let the people who are not engaged necessarily in the back and forth, but they're just lurking and hearing, Jesus is speaking to everyone there. And think about this. Everybody's been able to read John chapter 8 for 2,000 years since it was penned, 1900 and some change. Since it was first penned by John, anybody who's read this is able to be, if you will, kind of a fly on the wall of Jesus speaking to these people who have always been his adversaries. But the idea of freedom and knowing what truth is and having that truth set you free from the matter of sin as Jesus turns it to this. Now again, this whole back and forth is going to be over who they are nationalistically. That's who they're talking about. Jesus is speaking of spiritual matters, which he most always did. So he says to them in verse 37, I know that you're Abraham's descendants. Now notice he doesn't say in the spiritual sense. He's just talking, he's using their terms, and he's about to turn it back. I know that you are Abraham's descendants. Now he's setting up really for what he's going to say towards the latter part of the chapter. I know that you are Abraham's descendants, but you seek to kill me. Why is that? Because my word has no place in you. So he's going to basically say, you're no different than the devil who's wanted to be rid of me ever since I came onto the scene. The devil has always known who Jesus is, but now the devil knows that he is among his creation in the form of the person that we know as Jesus Christ. And so, of course, the devil's going to stir up his people to try to thwart his work. But imagine this. Whenever Jesus is doing the things that he's doing and the devil stirs up his people and he's able to see things from the outside, the devil, when he looks at the person of Jesus Christ, is looking at his creator. And the one that he hates, absolutely hates, he's looking to destroy by stirring up man. That's what goes on behind the scenes, and it's sometimes something that escapes our remembering. So he says this, you want me dead. Now, why is that? Because my word has no place in you. You are impervious to it. Rather than come to an understanding of the truth, you'd rather kill me and get rid of me altogether, which they do consistently. Verse 38, I speak what I have seen with my Father, and you do what you have seen with your father. Isn't this interesting? Remember here, we're always told you can't be judgmental. And so Jesus was always loving people. We've got the bookstore, thought of Jesus slinging the lamb around his neck, and that he was never in any ways difficult or harsh or judgmental. Right here, he flat out says it. I do the things that I've seen my father do. You do the things that you see your father do, and your father's the devil. It's pretty judgmental there, Jesus. Be careful. All right, verse 39. So they answered and they said to him, Abraham is our father. And Jesus said, if you were Abraham's children, you would do the works of Abraham. What were the works of Abraham? Interesting statement. Again, these people are so focused on the law and the things of the law, especially the Torah. So the first five books of the Bible itself, they're looking at the law and all of the things there. That's where you find Abraham's story, of course. Abraham is first introduced to us in the book of Genesis, long before the actual law was ever given. So here Jesus takes it back pre-Moses, all the way back to Abraham. Now, again, they don't have a problem with that because they know that through Abraham, the promise of the nation was given to them in chapter 12 of Genesis, where God says, I'm going to make a great nation out of you. All right, so he's promised to do that. Through you, the nations will be blessed. That's the promise. Remember, it was also predicated on a few other things. I want to do this work in you, Abraham. Are you willing to come with me? I'm going to take you to a land you do not know, but you're going to have to leave your house and everything that you know and follow me. Of course, we know the story. Abraham did that. We're told, chapter 15, that Abraham believed God and God accounted it or put it to his account as this is a righteous act. Why? Because God had made a promise to him. He looked at God and said, the person who's made this promise is worthy of my trust. I will believe and I will walk with him by faith. This is what Jesus is saying to them. If you were as much like Abraham as you're trying to tell us that you are, you would have accepted everything that I've said to you and you would have believed it by faith. So you can say that you're the descendants of Abraham, but you're nothing like him. If you were, you would do as he did. You may not have understood it. It may not have made complete sense to you, but you would have known that it was true, just like Abraham. He couldn't have put his finger on anything and said, oh, I can see this how this is all going to work out. I can trust him because I can see the end of these things. It was all brand new to him. So was it to these people as well, and really to any believer that's ever come to him. We hear the message of the gospel, and it's so foreign to us, but we do take that step and say, I believe, though I don't fully understand it. And then the wonderful part about that is that for the rest of your life, God will be revealing things to you about what you believe and why you believe it until we finally see him face to face and it is perfected. That's the promise to the believer. Well, so basically he says, if you believed, if you were actually his kids, you would do what he did. Verse 40 tells us, but now instead, this is by contrast, but now you seek to kill me, a man who has told you the truth, which I heard from God. Abraham did not do this. You never tried to. Abraham was not a murderer. You guys, if left to your own devices, would murder me right here where I stand. It's a real confrontational thing. This is not what Abraham did. Abraham heard the invitation of God, believed God to be worthy of his trust, and he walked with him by faith. Same thing. Here Jesus says, if you'll be my disciple, you will know the truth, and that truth will set you free. They wanted nothing to do with it. They didn't employ any kind of faith. Instead, they just wanted to kill the person, Jesus, who was saying the things that he was saying. So you get the picture here? This is the adversarial part. So he says, verse 41, you do the deeds of your father. And so they said to him, we were not born of fornication. We have one Father, God. Oof. This tells you the depths of their blindness. Now, this is a shot directly at Jesus and Mary and Joseph. They know the story. Clearly, they wouldn't have said it this way. They know who he is. They know where this is coming from. And this was just a way of being petty and being horrible. And they're attacking him in his human sense, which they know nothing about. They don't know who his father is. They know nothing about that. And so it is Jesus who brought up the matter of the Father. My Father, I do those things that my Father says. They want to make this about Joseph. They want to make it about his earthly. But remember, Jesus is saying this to manifest the hearts of people. At the end of their lives, when they had to stand before God and they had to give account, they would have to be able to say, or they would have to defend the things that they had said. And that God had said, I sent him directly to you and you rejected him. This is an accountability matter. And maybe if you're hearing this, I don't know how you may have found our YouTube channel. Maybe somebody that you know sent you this link for this passage or for this particular Bible study. We just need to remember that as we study through the scriptures and we hear these absolute statements, absolutes like there's no other way around it, when Jesus says, if you're my disciples, you will know the truth and the truth will make you free. By him saying that, there's no other way to understand truth. There is no other person through whom truth can come. It is all found in and through him, and there are no exclusions. So with him being able to say that, this is a matter of accountability. So if you're hearing this and maybe hearing it for the first time, please don't turn your back on this, what you're hearing. Please investigate it further. Hear the whole of the matter. You're just hearing one little section out of the book of John, chapter 8. Reading the entirety of the book of John, again, if you've found this on YouTube, we've done the entire study through the Gospel of John up to this point, obviously. Still going to get through the rest of the book. But I can tell you this, that where we are currently in this book, if you started at chapter 1, verse 1 to where we are right here, everything that you would ever need to know about how to assure yourself of eternity is found just in how far we've come. You would know. You would be able to know for fact, for sure, that if you died right now, that you could be reconciled to him because of his sacrifice. Heavy stuff when you stop to think of it. One other thing. This is, sorry to riff on this. I don't think I've ever said that, ever on camera. I don't think I've ever said that before. So interesting. If there is someone that's hearing this for the first time and you don't know how you got to this, please send me an email because I'm kind of intrigued by this whole thing. I don't know why I was so prompted to say what I just said. Verse 41, you do the deeds of your father. And so they said to him, we are not born of fornication. We have one Father, God. And Jesus said to them, well, if God were your Father, you would love me. For I proceed forth and I came from God, nor did I come of myself, but he sent me. So they're saying we have one Father and our Father is God. Jesus said, I would say the same thing. But here's the thing. He has sent me here. And again, they're not going to believe him in this, but this is that matter of accountability. If they were to say, well, what proof do you offer? He'd be able to say, well, first of all, you can't find any flaw in my genealogy. If they were curious, if they wanted to know the truth, he could have offered that to them. He could also say, look at all the miraculous things. Give me an explanation for how miracles happen unless God's the one who produces them. Everything that he's able to do, they cannot do, and yet there's no curiosity in them. This is how religion just blinds people. If you're not familiar with it, we have religious people all over our world and in our country in particular. Religion doesn't save people, though. Religion is just usually a terrible bondage. But he's able to say, I come forth from God. I didn't come of myself. I'm not here just because I decided to come take a walk among my creation. I was sent here specifically by the Father. Why? To do the things he's doing right here. To make people accountable, but to teach the truth so that people would have something to which they could hold on to. Think of all the other religions that there are. They're just writings from ancient people, and they're more philosophy or what they think of their concepts of God. But never do you find in any religion anywhere outside of the Judeo-Christian, the biblical view of God, did God become and walk among his own creation because he loved them. That is unique to Christianity and to Judaism. And yet you can see, even in Judaism, there's an incredible blindness as we see it right here. So he says, now, why do you not understand my speech? ? It's a rhetorical question. He gives the answer. Why? Well, because you are not able to listen to my words. There's a lack of ability, and I believe absolutely that this is willfulness, not because God made them, as the Calvinists would teach. But again, if that's what people want to believe, this has been something that's argued throughout the church. I'm not going to take the time to do it. I've done it in some other programs and on some other topical things. But right here, he just says, you're not able to listen to my word. So there's the idea of hearing the audible. They understand in the sense that he's speaking to them in terms that they know and understand the words themselves. If they didn't, they couldn't have their debate with him. But they didn't hear him with understanding, and that's the problem. What's the reason for it? You're not able. Why are you not able? There was no desire on their part. Either God forced them to be deaf to his words, or because of their own hatred of him, they could not hear. We see it all the time in our world today. We may be so convinced of our position that we may hear the other side, And we may even understand their words, but we just don't agree with them in any way. So their words are never really brought to heart to us, and there's no change. Okay, so it works in both directions. So again, myself as a believer in the person of Jesus, if someone came to me from a Pharisaical side of things and tried to convince me of their side, I'm not able to hear their words. Why? Because I don't desire to hear their words. I know the truth, and as Jesus said, that truth has set me free. So whatever argument they could present to me is not going to have any effect on me. My mind is made up on these matters. Well, same thing with them. They've made up their minds. So, verse 44, you are of your father, the devil. Here he goes getting all judgmental again. And so as a result of that, the desires of your father, those are what you want to do. He was a murderer from the beginning. He does not stand in the truth. Why is that? Because there is no truth in him. Everything that we know about Lucifer, the devil, Satan, call him whatever you want to, we know that we would never follow him because he can't speak the truth. He's been lying to people since the Garden of Eden. Remember the whole Adam and Eve thing? Yeah, he was lying to them back then. And isn't it interesting because his first salvo in this whole thing was to doubt the very words that God had spoken to Adam and Eve. Remember when he asks Eve the question about, well, didn't he tell you that you can't eat of, he asked her the question, didn't he just say, isn't this what he said? You can't eat of the tree. And so she says, yeah, this is what he said, and we can't eat it. We can't even look at it. And again, it is the devil who basically says at that point, well, that's not exactly what he said. And the reason that he said it was, as the reasoning of Satan is, the only reason he doesn't want you to do that is because the day that you do it, you'll be just like him. He's jealous of his position, doesn't want you to be like he is. It was a lie, and it brought about death. Death of billions and billions of people through the ages who have died in rebellion against God from that one simple rebellion. Because at that point, death entered in to this creation and spiritual blindness ensued. We see it all around us today. Well, that's the fruit of all of this. The devil's the one who started the whole thing, and now Jesus is saying you're just like him. Now, verse 45, but because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. So you won't believe because you don't want to come to an understanding. Because I tell you the truth, you plug your ears, you won't hear it. Which of you convicts me of sin? Now, again, it's kind of a rhetorical question. None of them is going to answer. So he goes on and just says this. And if I tell you the truth, why do you not believe me? So those two questions. Which one of you can go ahead and bring a case against me as being a sinner? Nobody speaks up. So the second of those questions, again, is he says, now if I tell you the truth, then why don't you believe me? Again, they can't contest this. They're confounded at this point. In verse 47, he says, now he who is of God hears God's words. Now therefore, or because of that, you do not hear. Why? Because you are not of God. Interesting. So there again becomes this big, huge debate. Is it God who makes them believe? No. This idea of being of God means that he has given this information out through his Son, and those who believe are his. They come to him and they abide in him. They are his disciples, and that truth is what has set them free. In their rejection, they make full proof of what Jesus has just said here. You are not able to hear. You desire not to hear these things. He who is of God hears God's words, and therefore because of that, you will not hear. You do not hear. And why is that? Because you are not of God. Now, verse 48, so the Jews answered, and they said to him, do we not say rightly that you are a Samaritan and that you are possessed of demons? Okay, this is again a way of trying to deflect that they're being called out on this whole thing. So again, they want to make this about where you come from. Again, if you're from Samaria, from the northern part of Israel, then you must be demon-possessed. They would think that of anybody that comes from the north. Much more so, they want to make this so deeply personal, and they start to take their shots at him on the personal level. And you're from Samaria, you're a Samaritan, so you're from the north, you're demon-possessed anyway. That's just their way of trying to dismiss him. Well, notice he doesn't even take on the whole idea about being a Samaritan. He just deals with the matter of being possessed. So Jesus answers them in verse 49. He says, I don't have a demon, but I honor my Father, and you dishonor me. So you want to talk about who's being demonically inspired here? I honor the Father honors me, and you don't honor either one of us. Pretty heavy stuff. Obviously, these people are getting really spun up about now because they can't lay a glove on him. So he says in verse 50, and I do not seek my own glory. Now there is one who seeks and who judges, and most assuredly I say to you, if anyone keeps my word, he will never see death. That will be the ultimate judgment. When God judges, he will judge based upon whether or not a person has had their sin forgiven because of the finished work of Jesus at the cross. That is the one thing that will cause them to be judged one way or the other. For those people that say you've got to have works in your life, you've got to be baptized, you've got to speak in tongues, give me a break. That's all additional stuff that happens after you're saved. You do those things, you do works, and they are evidence of your life in him, or you get baptized because you identify with who he is. If a person is able to be gifted with any of the gifts of the Spirit, that all comes after salvation, not before. It's all additional. So anybody who tries to say that those things have to happen in addition to salvation has never studied their Bible. They're just repeating nonsense that they've heard from someone else. So he says, most assuredly I say to you, verse 51, if anyone keeps my words, he will never see death. Oh man, this sent them over backwards. This is going to, as we work our way to the end of the chapter, this makes them, they go bananas over this whole thing. So he talks about not seeing death. Of course, he's speaking spiritually. They're still stuck in right there and right now. He's speaking of eternal matters. Now, another thing for us to remember, we only get little bits and pieces of this. I'm of the opinion that if somebody came to him and said, I don't understand about how a person could, by believing in you, could never see death, I'm sure that Jesus would take the time to explain it to them in detail. We don't get that here, but he's not going to leave somebody just, spinning out there that may genuinely not understand what he means by that, but have a genuine heart that is seeking. God's going to answer that question. We just don't have it. Here we have just John telling us, here's the things that happened. It was adversarial, and this is what was the dialogue that's there. We don't have anything more than just this. So the Jews said to him, now we know that you have a demon. Abraham is dead, and the prophets, and you say if anyone keeps my word, he will never taste death. So again, they ask, are you greater than our father Abraham, who is dead? And the prophets, those are also dead. So who do you make yourself out to be? They're going to regret that question. Again, I have to just sit back and kind of chuckle at this. It's sad because these are men who died in their sin. They're 2,000 years into their eternity of separation from God. It's not a good thing. So it's not comical. What is comical is they don't even recognize just who it is that they're talking to and his enduring patience. Because again, many of us, if we were God, we'd have just wiped them out on the spot because they're just being awful. Well, again, he gives everybody an opportunity and they become accountable for the things that they have heard. So Jesus said, okay, back to, since you guys are thinking about right here and right now and you're thinking Abraham, let's go with that. If I honor myself, then my honor is nothing. So if I'm just drawing attention to myself and I'm not speaking of anything of the Father, if I didn't tell you that I was here because he sent me, if I didn't tell you that I'm here to do the things that he sent me to do and say the things that I say, if I'm only making this about me, then there's a case to be made here. But he says, if I honor myself, my honor is nothing. But it is my Father who honors me, of whom you say that he is your God. This is basically Jesus just saying, how ironic is this? The very same person that you say that you belong to, if I was just doing this on my own, you'd have one thing, but he sent me here, and the very person who sent me is the one that you say that you honor. Do you not see your inherent contradiction? And again, if they were to say, well, what contradiction? Well, since you use Abraham, would Abraham have wanted to kill me, or did he believe the things that God had said and then trusted him? You don't do that. So you can say whatever you want with your mouth. Your actions are going to speak louder than your words. Very important thing for us to remember as the church. we want to make sure that what we say with our mouth is absolutely backed up by our actions. Well, in this case, their actions, they absolutely destroy their own argument about some kind of spiritual purity. So Jesus is able to say, "Yet you have not known him, you haven't known the Father, but I do. I know him. And if I say that I do not know him, then I would be the liar just like you people are. But I do know him, and I hold his word to myself. I honor his word, and then I act accordingly." Again, by definition and by implication, your actions absolutely contest your words. The things that you, the Pharisees, are saying are absolutely contradicted by your very actions. And here Jesus says there is perfect harmony between what I say and what I do. There is no contradiction. So with that being said, your father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it and he was glad. Oh my goodness. Now, keep this in mind when we hear the reaction here about those people that say, well, Jesus never claimed to be God. Well, hang on. This is a great proof text for those people that like to say that. Because if he didn't say it the way that they want him to say it, then they're not even being honest about their desire to try to make a point. You can show them this and they say, well, he never claimed to be it. Well, first of all, if you understand what he's basically saying by claiming to be I am, no one could ever say that. And God would never approve him saying it if he wasn't. And just in case they say, well, you're reading too much into that, look at how the Jews reacted to it. They knew exactly what he meant by this. So they keep wanting to make this about Abraham. Now Jesus is saying it's time to bring this whole debate to a close. He's going to go ahead and put a nail in this coffin, if you will. So he says, Abraham saw my day, and he rejoiced to see it. What could that mean? And what could it be looking at? Again, there's all kinds of speculation. But to me, the greatest of those, of the things that were said to Abraham that we have record of, the one that does make the most sense to me is the one that speaks about that through you the nations will be blessed. In fact, let's look at it. It's found in found in chapter 12 of Genesis. So let's go to Genesis 12. This is that beginning of the covenant that was made. So Genesis 12. It's going to be at verse 1 is where we'll start. So the Lord said to Abram. Now, at this point, he was known as Abram, and that just means exalted father. Now, by the time that God changes him changes his name to Abraham, then it becomes father of the multitudes or father of the nations. So that idea that God changed his name, that's a blessing that he understood. But there's a singular blessing. Again, when it speaks about Jesus's day, when he says he rejoiced to see my day, I would believe that Abraham understood that there would be a forever solution to things through the person of Jesus. And again, I don't believe we necessarily nail this down to one particular verse at one particular time, but everything that verse implies. Let me explain. So he says to him simply here, get out of your country, from your family, from your father's house, to a land that I will show you. I mentioned this a little earlier. This is the matter of faith. This is what's put before him. Now, Abraham could have said, yeah, I'm not interested. I'm comfortable where I am. Verse 2, he says, now I'm going to make a great nation out of you. I'm going to bless you. I'm going to make your name great, and you will be a blessing. Now, I'm going to bless those who bless you, and I'm going to curse those who curse you. And in you, the families of the earth will be blessed. Now, that blessing, it implies not just in the earthly sense, but it has an everlasting understanding to it as well. Because if he's going to make a nation out of one man, that's going back and looking at it. He talks about that it's going to be your family line and the place where you will live. Okay, but that's very much earthly. But if you're going to be able to bless the entirety of the nations of mankind, that's looking forward way beyond the borders of Israel and way beyond his family line that doesn't yet even exist. Isaac isn't even born when this promise is given. So it never even occurs to him initially, could it, that it's going to be a forever promise, but he came to that understanding. So when it is, did God explain it to him in greater detail? We have very limited, though it has, Abraham's life has chapters dedicated to it in Genesis. And of course, we know so much about him because his name is always being brought up as the father of the nation of Israel. But the important part of it is that there is a forever part, because Jesus, again, speaking in a spiritual sense. So there is that understanding that somehow through Abraham was going to come the solution to mankind's problem. So he's able to say, Father Abraham rejoiced to see my day, and he saw it, and he was glad, he rejoiced. And so the Jews said to him, you are not 50 years old, and you have seen Abraham? So again, they're thinking earthly. Jesus is speaking spiritually. Look at verse 58. Man, this is, again, we sometimes forget this is in chapter 8. Maybe you've never seen it before. So Jesus says, most assuredly I say to you that before Abraham was, I am. Now, for Jesus to be able to claim himself to be the I am, says, before Abraham was. Now that's more than 2,000 years before his statement here. It's 3,000 years, probably closer to that. Again, people love to change things on dates and all the rest of that, but go back, that's thousands of years before Jesus, and he's able to say, before he ever was, I am. And when we go back to where that was said, remember that's what Moses had heard from God when he says, well, who am I supposed to tell Pharaoh sent me? Remember, it was God speaking to him through the burning bush, said to him, you tell him that I am sent you. And I am simply means the becoming one, the idea of self-existence. That's a way of saying God who is eternal and doesn't have a beginning, nor does he have an end. The implications of saying I am are so mind-boggling to us in these finite earthly bodies, but we understand it somewhat because of what we see in the text. So for Moses to hear, the one who is speaking to you has no beginning and has no end. I'm the one who is becoming and the self-existent one. There's so many different ways that you can look at I am. Well, here Jesus says, hey, before Abraham even was, thousands of years ago, I am. I am existent. Oh my God. Now, for those people who say he never claimed to be God, well, clearly it was God who was speaking in the burning bush when he said, I am sent you. Here Jesus says, I am, I am. That's what he is saying. Catch the gravity of that. For Jesus to say, I am, only God could say that. Now, if he really wasn't, then the Father, or God as we know him, Jehovah, would have struck him dead for this. Or we would have seen that God would have nullified his ministry, as he did anybody else who tried to do it. Look at what Lucifer did when he tried to make himself God. Look at what happened with that. You get it. Verse 59. So what did they do? They took up stones to throw at him, means to kill him. But Jesus hid himself and went out of the temple, going through the midst of them, and so he passed by. Now, it's not just that there were throngs of people and he hid in the crowds and just kind of maneuvered his way out. Again, by him, this is just giving them evidence of exactly who he is. He just says, I'm God standing right in front of you. If you want to know how I can say before Abraham was, I am, let me give you a demonstration. As you're picking up stones to kill me, I'm going to hide myself and walk right in the middle of you all. He's able to do that because his time had not come. Now, this same Jesus would give himself voluntarily into their hands at the appointed time at Passover, a little while from here, and he would give himself as the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, but it would be done on his terms, not on theirs. And so we will get to that in due course as we go through John here. But how impactful is this? How impressive are his words? So with that being said, we're going to pick up in chapter 9 next week. But again, a lot of things have been said in this. Really, really impactful things. And so if you're following along through our study in John, I'm so grateful that you're with us, by the way. And if I've said anything that you have questions on, I know that there was a lot of content here. Please feel free to send us an email. You can get to our website for the ministry at the end of this YouTube channel or this YouTube presentation. You'll see the website there. It's oldpaththeology.net. And you can email us through that if you have any questions. If you haven't already, feel free to subscribe to the YouTube channel, and then you'll see when we put up content. We're doing some topical things as we go along. We also teach Old Testament. These always go up. New Testament always go up on Thursdays, and the Old Testament goes up on Mondays. So we're glad if you follow along with us. We're going to get through the entirety of the Bible if the Lord leaves us here long enough. And just so thankful to have you along. Again, if you have any questions, please contact us. We'd love to hear from you. And God bless you as you pursue Him through His Word.